sovereign debt crises basically are likely to lead to war in a similar way that war is likely to lead to sovereign debt crisis. They tend to feed on each other because obviously one of the ways that a country can get in debt is war. But on the other hand, if a country already finds itself in debt and is running into its own kind of inflation problems or financial stability problems, then other countries can perceive that as weakness and say, well, let's see how well they can do war when they're already this indebted. We are seeing, I think, an uptick in just more hostile action. I mean, I don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years. Maybe it stays at a simmer, or maybe something more devastating happens.
Late last year, billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio put the odds of a hot world war at 50% due to two brutal ground wars being fought in Ukraine and Gaza. This was after months of repeated warnings that the US and China were on the brink of going to war with each other over Taiwan, intellectual property theft, and other rapidly escalating issues. In a post on LinkedIn in October, the billionaire wrote, "It appears to me that the odds of transitioning from the contained conflicts to a more uncontained hot world war that includes the major powers have risen from 35% to about 50% over the last 2 years." Dalio concluded his warning by predicting that geopolitical instability will become the norm this decade. He's not alone in the gloomy predictions for global politics and economy. Renowned trends forecaster Gerald Celente has repeatedly warned the public about our government's intentions to keep dragging us to more wars as the global economy gets closer and closer to its inevitable end. Gerald's favorite phrase on the subject is, "When all else fails, they take you to war." During a recent interview with Microscopic Gold Republic, renowned macro analyst and sound money advocate Lynn Alden discussed the deep correlation between wars and economic collapse. Like Dalio, Alden believes the next few years will be chiefly marked by political instability, violence, and widespread chaos, much like the 1940s. According to the popular macro analyst, the world is now in a sovereign debt crisis, and a global reset is not only inevitable, but also imminent. To save face, Alden believes global leaders will try out a number of measures, including the revaluation of gold. Has the reset begun? How worse is it going to get in 2024? Please watch the video to the end for answers to these important questions and more. Before we dive right in, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks and enjoy the video.
Described before is that fiat currencies, the big ones at least, are metastable, meaning that they have some degree of stability during their lifetimes, but they are not fully stable. And so small amounts of problems build up and get papered over from recession to recession to recession. But the problem is they don't go back to their prior baseline each time. That'd be a stable system. Instead, it's always a little bit more kind of duct taped and papered over until these things really build. And so one way to visualize it is so for 40 years in the United States, whenever we had a recession, central banks would lower their interest rates, and that would encourage more credit growth to build up, as everything's reliant on credit just always going up. One stat that I gave in the book is that from like the 1960s, which was that particular data set, all up to the present day, the total debt in the U.S., so public and private debt combined, increased every single year smoothly and without fail, with one brief exception for 18 months during the global financial crisis. It went down by like 1.5%, and then they basically pulled out all the stops to keep that going up again. And so what happens is that without constant credit growth, the system as it's currently designed starts to fail. So they lower interest rates and they encourage and allow for higher levels of debt loads without having higher levels of interest expense. And that's a cycle that kind of just recession after recession after recession keeps happening until they run out of room. They basically hit zero interest rates or even mildly negative interest rates, and debts are extraordinarily high. And then they run into basically a financial crisis. That happened in 1929, and it happened in 2008. That's basically when zero is not enough, when zero interest rates are not enough to kind of keep the system going. And so then there's expansion of the monetary base. There's a transfer of private debt to the public realm, basically money printing. But then that last part of the cycle is that if money, it's kind of like the problem keeps getting kicked upstairs, right? So it's like, you start in the private sector, it goes into the banking, the real estate sector goes in the banking sector, and eventually a lot of that excess gets just put into the sovereign level. And then the problem there is that once a sovereign is highly indebted and interest rates are no longer going structurally down because they basically bounced off zero. If they're ever having any sort of inflation challenge, and if they raise rates, those interest rates are a much less effective tool for controlling inflation because they blow out the fiscal deficit. If you have like 150% debt to GDP and you raise rates to 5%, vastly increase your fiscal deficit. And then if you're like Japan, the central bank is stuck monetizing it even during periods of above target inflation. And so generally, when systems get to that point, they start getting on track for a reset, or perhaps a less loaded word is recapitalization, where they end up, if it was an emerging market, they would default and restructure on their debt because they would have debts that they can't print, like dollars. But in countries where the liabilities are printable, they basically devalue the currency significantly. And that's been a cycle that's repeated several times. And then with it, usually it's a switch over to another type of money, right? So you go from gold-backed system, for example, to the Bretton Woods system. And then you go from the Bretton Woods system to just a fiat currency system. And the question is, and this is why it's relevant today, is what's on the other side of this system, right? So as the major powers, and it's not going to happen in 6 weeks, but I mean over the years or decades ahead, as these big countries work through their untenable debt loads, and they no longer have that declining interest rate to offset them, as they either sharply devalue their monies, damage their own monetary network effects, especially in a world where new things exist now. What's money going to look like on the other side of this event horizon? And we don't know yet. I would say, I would argue that Bitcoin right now is a strong contender. I also think depending on when that happens, there can be a period of central banks recapitalizing themselves with their gold. So a kind of a sharp currency devaluation that then gets kind of tethered to gold for a period of time to regain kind of stability and confidence in it.
One main weakness of the current fiat monetary system is that it isn't backed by anything. This is why central banks can print money recklessly and at will without giving any thought to the effects of their activities on the currency. According to the latest data from the U.S. Treasury Department, the national debt is now growing at a rate of $1 trillion every 100 days. By the end of December 2024, the projected U.S. national debt would be approximately $37 trillion. To further expatiate the severity of the debt issue, it took over 200 years to hit the first $1 trillion in debt, and now we are doing that in just a little over 3 months. According to the latest forecast from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the record-high national debt will get even bigger, reaching a massive $54 trillion by 2034. That's without considering worsening geopolitical strifes worldwide and the United States' flair for playing Big Brother. During the interview, Alden further discussed the sovereign debt crisis and the impending global reset, predicting that the reset will be marked by capital controls, stagflation, and increasing political polarization. Let's get back to the interview.
Transition from a structurally disinflationary period to a more structurally inflationary period because we had the combination of globalization for the past 30 years. So as China opened up to the world, as Soviet Union fell and opened up to the world, we basically connected Western capital with Eastern labor and resources. And so this was this like multi-decade period of disinflation and efficiencies, and kind of, all the benefits and some downsides that come with that. And so that's been going on for a while, and that's been one of the big variables that allowed interest rates to have their, what some term like a great moderation, basically a structurally declining interest rates and disinflation for a multi-decade period. And the problem is that the system, it's almost like stability leads to instability, because if you have a very stable system that has a unit of account that's gradually debasing, but not too quickly, that allows for the maximum amount of leverage to be built on top of it. Because if you have a currency that's very hard, borrowers are going to be careful to leverage it too much. On the other hand, if you have a currency that's rapidly devaluing, like the Argentina peso, lenders are going to be very reluctant to lend for long periods of time in that currency. And so it's actually that medium state of a gradually debasing unit that historically tends to gather the most leverage on it. And the problem is that eventually, when you run out of the ability to keep lowering your interest rates, and you start actually transitioning to to higher interest rates, that causes a massive shock to the system. And so, for example, the United States has like never had 3 negative years in a row for Treasury performance, and we're on track for that happening now. We've had it happen before in real terms. We never have had it happen before in nominal terms, let alone real terms. And that's the collateral that underpins the system. And we even saw last year, UK's government got shaken up by the bond market, basically by the bond market's reaction to some of their budget proposals. And they actually had a personnel shakeup because of the bond market in large part, which is something we haven't seen in a very long time. And so I think what we are is we're increasing evidence that we're going through one of these sovereign debt crises. And that doesn't mean that it all happens next year, for example. Some of these things can take a pause for a period of time. If you get some degree of maybe de-escalation in the military conflicts, or you get a mild recession that helps kind of slow that down for a period of time. But the problem is that those issues are still there. And so when you get past that potential period of, say, brief stability, it's likely to happen again and worse is the problem. And so I think that basically until there's a big structural change or devaluation in some of these major currencies, this is kind of still going to keep bubbling to the surface until it kind of forces that outcome, which can be highly disruptive. And I think that's the path we're on.
When the United States hit its debt ceiling in 2023, there were lots of talks about the government defaulting on its debt obligations. However, some experts noted that they wouldn't allow it to happen because such an event would shake the country to its core and make investors lose confidence in the dollar. Yet Alden and others believe it will take something of that magnitude to get us back on track. The question remains, will they keep using band-aid solutions until everything becomes absolute chaos, or will they make the needed changes now when there might still be time? Everything suggests it will be chaos or nothing to get us out of this mess. Please share your thoughts on Alden's interview in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.